Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me on my newest town hall. Wearing blue today to support our first responders and emergency personnel, and obviously thank them and everybody else that is still out there working so that we can have some sort of normalcy, some food and protection, and just really appreciate that today and every day. So thank you to them. Today is a really special town hall. We're going to be talking about gerrymandering and how we fight gerrymandering, how we did it before the quarantine, during the quarantine, and how we're going to do it moving forward. And I'm lucky to have Jean Handley here. She is with Fair Districts PA. Thank you, Jean. I appreciate you joining me.
Well, good morning, Patty, and thanks for the opportunity to continue the conversation about redistricting and gerrymandering. This is really appreciated, and so does Fair Districts.
Thanks, I appreciate it. It's such an important topic. I would hope that a lot of people know about it. I hope that everybody knows about it, but you know, sometimes things get their 5 minutes in the sun and then are overtaken by other issues. And right now, you know, coronavirus is obviously the main target of everything, but we need to keep track of all those other issues that we had prior to the quarantine, because they're still just as important today as they were before. And we just got to keep at it until we get the change we need. So can you tell us, how long has Fair Districts and Fair Districts PA been around?
Fair Districts actually got its start officially back in 2016 when Carol Kunaholm and several people got together and started the initiative. So we've been around for a while.
And of course, your mission is to fight, is to push against gerrymandering and make sure that it doesn't continue, right? That's the main purpose of Fair Districts, or what exactly?
Basically, yeah, what we are, Patty, is it's a nonpartisan, and I'm going to stress that.
Yeah.
It is totally nonpartisan, and this is a nonpartisan issue. We're all volunteer coalition of Pennsylvanians. We have over 40 supporting organizations. And what we are looking for is a more impartial and fair way of drawing the districts and eliminating gerrymandering. We want it to be accountable and transparent. And so that's basically what we've been advocating for the last 4 years.
Yeah. And for people who don't understand, what exactly is gerrymandering?
Gerrymandering is the drawing of district lines to benefit a particular party or a candidate to the disadvantage of the others. And it's been around since the inception of the country, actually, Patty. Back in 1789, that was like the first gerrymandering. But because of the advent of mapping technologies and the computer technologies and the data mining, it has increased exponentially and to the negative, basically. And so now, with those kinds of tools, a profile can be drawn for the voters, and the selection process can be made so that they draw the people that are more advantageous to their cause or to voting for them into the districts and draw the other ones out. So yeah, it's definitely a very it's become a science, basically, and not necessarily to the good.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said, you know, that you were a nonpartisan organization, because I have been very vocal that both parties gerrymander. It's not just a Republican thing. It's not just a Democrat thing. I think, you know, in general, once people get in power, they really, really want to keep it. And they will do sometimes things that aren't fair, let's leave it at that, to keep that power. And gerrymandering is definitely one of those things. So, you know, just to kind of expand on what you said, kind of give a visual picture, you know, if you have a town that is more Democratic on one side and more Republican on the other, you know, they may split that town down the middle to make one district more favorable to a party than another so that they can ensure the votes. And if you look at districts on the map and you see the shape of the districts, it really screams gerrymandering. So my district in particular looks like a goldfish with the fins that come out down here and, you know, a little fin that comes out the back. And you look at that and you think, really? Like, and it's all done to give one party an advantage in an election year. And that's why it's so difficult most times to unseat an incumbent, regardless of what they're thought of, you know, by the voters. So I'm glad that you said that.
Well, it is a nonpartisan issue, Patty. And if you look at, well, Pennsylvania is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. It was fixed a bit congressionally when the Supreme Court made their decision, the state Supreme Court made their decision back in 2018, but we're still very, very gerrymandered for state legislative districts. And there are a lot of other states that are like that. Right now we are gerrymandered and the Republicans happen to be in power. But if you go to Maryland or you go to Illinois, it is equally bad in those states because the Democrats have the power in those particular states. So basically, if you have the opportunity and the power of the pen, basically, you're going to do it, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Both parties do it. So, and have done it in the past and will continue to do it. It's a you know, it's almost a self-preservation kind of thing because certainly, as you mentioned, they want to keep power individually, or they certainly want to keep power as a party. So yeah, and it's not necessarily the shapes of the districts, although they are somewhat indicative, but it's why the shapes are drawn the way they are, which goes back to what you said, and it's to advantage a particular party or a particular candidate.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, why should the voters be so upset? So, you know, if let's say I'm a Democrat. If the Democrats gerrymander a map, shouldn't that make me happy? Or if I'm a Republican and the Republicans gerrymander a map, shouldn't I be like, yay, go team? You know, why is it bad for voters?
I could go on for a long time here, but I will try to be somewhat brief on this. Gerrymandering, there's a number of different things that make it bad for voters and citizens in general. One of the things that you can look at it as is a form of voter suppression and a form of basically an affront to the citizens' rights to a free and fair election. And let me give you an example of that. In 2018, when we had the midterms for the state elections, we had 203 House seats up for election. And out of those 203 House seats, 78 of those candidates, Republicans or Democrats, ran unopposed by a major party candidate in the general election. So basically, they won their elections in the primaries. And another 98 of those candidates ran and won by a greater than 10% margin, which is not particularly competitive. And so if you add those up, right there, you've got 176, I think my math is okay, elections that were not competitive. And if you look at the state Senate, there were 25 candidates up for election, or seats up for election. And out of that, 6 of those seats ran unopposed by a major party candidate in the general, and another 11 ran and won by greater than 10% margin. So 17 out of the 25 were considered uncompetitive. So if you're a voter what does that say to you? It says, why bother? If I don't have if my candidate doesn't have a chance, or even if there is not another candidate, why would I bother to go vote? And that's why I say it's kind of a form of voter suppression, and it's certainly an affront to um, to free and fair elections, because once again you have that lack of competitiveness. So that's one of the things. Some of the other things are that, and this is just as citizens of Pennsylvania or as the country in general, because of the districts drawn the way they are, and so it's pretty assured that many candidates will win. They can hold more extreme positions. And so what happens in the legislature, and you see it more and more in Harrisburg and other legislatures, is that gridlock is there because there is an inability or they do not want to compromise, and they want to hold their positions. And they can't be held necessarily accountable by their voters because they're going to win, basically. I mean, it's been decided that that district will look that way, and they will win. So that's another thing. And then with the gridlock, you have lots of things that aren't getting done. And you have tremendous amount of issues: infrastructure, education, lead poisoning, the budget. All of those things have gone into play. And like I said, I could go in for hours on that, but those are some of the things that are problems for us as voters and also as citizens of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and to go to your point, if it's a foregone conclusion that that candidate or that party is going to win, then people from the other party, whether that's Democrat or Republican, most likely are not going to step up and run. And like you said, when you have a seat that is uncontested, that kind of gives free rein for that candidate or that politician then to really do what they want to do in office, because they know they're pretty much untouchable, unless they, break the law, of course. So speaking as somebody who is a candidate, it's a lot of work to run for office. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of time. It takes time away from your family. It's just a lot of hard work. And why would somebody put themselves in that position if they know they're not going to run? And that's what you were saying about, voter suppression. It doesn't give the voters a chance to say we want to change. It doesn't give them a voice in the election. And that is really dangerous, because that has major consequences down the line on all types of issues, like you just said.
Exactly. And you've hit a big nail on the head. When I was going through those statistics about, running unopposed, that's in a lot of the reason why they run unopposed is because candidates from the other party, whether it be, one of the major parties or independent, whatever, they just don't feel that it is worth the investment to do that. And as you said, it robs the voters of choice, of accountability, holding the people that do win accountable,
right.
And all of those issues. So
yeah, because the best way to hold a politician accountable is at the voter box. And if they know there's no chance of repercussions for their actions or for their antics, or for holding up important legislation, they're just more brazen to do it. And so that's why it's super important to have somebody on both sides of the ticket, regardless of what party you personally belong to. Because I'm a Democrat, and I have Republican friends, and we all want our politicians, regardless of party, to do the best they can for us as voters. So, we don't want any politician getting too big for their britches, so to speak, and, thinking they're untouchable. So, gerrymandering, it seems like a simple issue. It seems like a one-item issue, but it really has ripples throughout. and touches a lot of different things.
Well, what it does also, I mean, it impedes the progress of Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
because of the gridlock and that kind of thing. And so until we get, what we say is gerrymandering isn't the issue you have to care about most, but is the issue you have to care about first. I
Yeah.
know that that sounds a little strange in light of the present coronavirus, but basically going in background, if you don't have an accountable legislature
Mhm.
or legislator, nothing matters. Nothing's going to get done until this changes. So gerrymandering is at the heart of how much of our legislative process works.
Mhm.
And the results of gerrymandering and who's in power determine the rules of how the both houses operate, which can have impact. It is very, very far reaching
Mhm.
to, in areas that people don't even understand. And it was amazing because I started this in 2017, early, when I got involved, and I have learned an incredible amount, some very, very good, and some
Mhm.
very eye-opening as to how all of this works.
Yeah, and something as simple as constituent services too. You know, how many of us have heard from voters that I can't get my legislator on the phone? I can't get an appointment with my legislator. When I call with the problem, they say, well, you call this person, maybe they can help you. You know, it's as simple as that, because if they're unafraid of getting voted out of office because they live in a what we call a safe district, meaning they have really no chance of getting voted out, then their attention to the voters starts to be limited. And that's where it starts to affect each individual voter personally, then, you know, when they need help or they want to voice an opinion on legislation that's currently working its way through up in Harrisburg. You know, there are definitely ways that gerrymandering can affect people on an everyday basis too.
You're absolutely right. And so, like it's through this whole thing, I think we've kind of summed up in a way many of the different impacts that it has on voters, whether it be the voter suppression, lack of choice, lack of responsiveness,
Yeah.
frustration on the part of voters, the lack of getting anything done. I mean, all of those things are kind of offshoots
Mhm.
or the effects of gerrymandering. And gerrymandering, fixing gerrymandering isn't going to fix everything, but it is a start to make the citizens feel more comfortable and feel like they're being represented and heard and that kind of thing too, and more accountable. So.
Yeah. And you touched briefly a little earlier on the fact that some maps had been redrawn by the courts. And I think that confuses a lot of people. I think a lot of people thought that was all the maps that were redrawn. Can you kind of cover that and why, hey, if the maps were redrawn, why are we even talking about this?
Yeah, that is a super important point. Back in 2018, the League of Women Voters and 18 plaintiffs had filed a lawsuit, and using the state constitution as its basis, saying that the congressional districts, the 18 congressional districts as we have, were in violation of the Constitution. And the lawsuit was won. And that was the first lawsuit, gerrymandering, that had ever actually been won. It was first that ever used the state constitutions. So it's kind of a template for other states going forward. But in any event, what's important about that is, yes, it temporarily changed the congressional districts until this next election. After 2020, and when they do the redistricting in 2021, which is the next redistricting, that is when it will go back to the same way of doing things and how we've ended up with for decades, basically, but 2011. And the other thing about that is that it did not do anything to change the way that the state legislative districts were drawn. That's a whole separate process. And once again, I could go in for hours on that too, but it did not affect that. So the process is still the same, and you will still potentially have the same type of gerrymandering going on in the 2021 redistricting. Does that kind of get at what you were asking?
It does, absolutely. Why weren't the state districts included? Were they included in that lawsuit and they were ignored, or were they only challenging the congressional maps?
They were only challenging the congressional maps.
Okay.
So, I mean, this is an incredibly difficult task. And let me say that lawsuits are not really the way that people want to go. I mean, and they're expensive, they take a long time, and that's kind of like a last resort type of thing. But because they are so difficult, and this issue is so difficult, they tackled the congressional districts. Now, the state legislative districts were challenged back in 2011 when the maps were drawn by Amanda Holt, a music teacher. And now she, I believe, is a representative, not a representative, but she's, I think, on the municipal representative up in Allentown area. But anyway, Amanda challenged it based on the amount of splits, and she won her case in our state Supreme Court the first time. And she proved that there didn't have to be as many municipal or township or, splits. And so they had to redraw the maps. She challenged them again and did not win the second time. But you could still see that you could do much less splits. So they have been challenged in court. It's just that not with that particular case.
And so since the congressional maps were challenged and were redrawn, I noticed that you said when the new maps are redrawn in 2021, those congressional maps are going to go back to the way they were always drawn. So there's really, am I understanding you correctly, that there's no guarantee because they were won in court that they're going to be drawn fairly this time in 2021?
That's exactly right. The process for drawing congressional maps, once again, I said it's different than the state legislative maps, but the process is the same unless something changes, unless we can get some legislation or some kind of change through that changes the dynamic, okay, or changes the process. And so, yes, it will go right back to the same process, and the potential is still there. And the same thing for the state legislative districts, because unless something is changed, that process stays the same and the potential is still there.
Yeah.
Now, there will be many more eyes watching, I hope, and maybe that will help. But as I said, unless something gets changed legislatively, their potential is to go right back to where we were in 2021.
So what's the solution? If we can't trust parties to draw fair maps, and going through the court takes an absurd amount of money and time, what's the option then? What can we do about it? What's the solution?
Well, from the Fair Districts standpoint, and we are supporting legislation, HB 22 and HB 23 in the House, and SB 1022 and 1023, SB 1023 in the Senate. They're the same bills, but just with the same wording, but one's in the House and one's in the Senate. Mm-hmm. And those bills, what they do is they establish an independent citizens commission to draw the districts. And there is a tremendous amount of support across the state for that. A poll was done by F&M back last fall, F&M College. 67% of the citizens of Pennsylvania would like to see independent citizens commission draw the districts. So those bills are crucial to getting an independent citizens commission done. And time is basically running out to get that done. We have basically until sometime in the summer to try to get those bills passed, because one, for the state legislative districts, it requires a constitutional amendment, which is kind of involved.
Yes.
And for the congressional districts, it's a simple bill, it's less involved, and it can be done. But the time, as I said, is becoming short. So we need to push for legislation for the independent citizens commissions, if possible, those particular bills. And in those bills, there is also protective criteria of how you draw the maps, and for transparency requirements for people to be able to have input and public meetings and that kind of thing. So in those bills, it establishes the commission. It also establishes parameters and some strict strict guidelines on how these maps are to be done, and how people are selected for the commission, that kind of thing. So that's our focus, is first of all an independent citizens commission, with also strict guidelines and parameters on how to draw the districts.
And like you said, there's this science to it. I mean, it's not like we're going to have just random people off the street sitting down in this commission and trying to figure out how to draw a fair map. I mean, there's definitely going to be guidelines for them to do it, and a path really that they can follow to get to a fair map, right?
Yeah, there's a stringent, there's an application process, and there are a lot of criteria that have to be met when you even apply. You can't be a lobbyist, you can't be a spouse of a lobbyist, you can't have hold a public elected public position, and there's a number of different things. And if you go to the PA legislative website and read the bills, or go to our website, the fairdistrictspa.com website, you can read about the bills. But there are strict criteria to even apply, and then it's a random selection process done by the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and then pools are established for the most registered, the party with the most registered voters in Pennsylvania, the second most registered voters, and then independents. There's 3 separate pools. So the independents have an opportunity now to have input where they have never had that. Yeah. And so then these pools are established, and then they're narrowed down, and the legislators get a chance to strike, just like juries, in juries, they get to strike a certain amount. And then out of those 3 separate pools are picked 11 commissioners, 4 of the largest party, 4 of the second largest party, and 3 independent commissioners. And then they are totally independent of the legislature. Yeah. And then when they draw the maps, there's no voting, or there's no approval or anything, at least by our bills, by the legislature at this time. I mean, it is totally independent. Although they do have a role, because the legislature will have a role in establishing some of the criteria. So it's not like they are cut out at all.
Yeah, and my view on gerrymandering is pretty straightforward. So I think that any Republican would tell you that their platform is what's best for the voters. And I think any Democratic politician or Democratic Party would tell you the same thing. Our party is our platform is what's best for the voters. Independents say the same thing. And so if you really truly feel that way, then why do you have to cheat to win an election? If you really feel and really believe that what you're offering is what the people want and need, then have a fair map and let the voters decide. I think, there's a lot of fear there, like we've got to keep it. But, just be confident in your party's ability to win over the voters and show them that you care enough about them, that you have their best interests at heart, and you'll win an election. So what is so scary about a fair map? I don't know.
Well, I think that in a lot of cases, they want to ensure that they remain in power. Yeah. Or that their agenda is pushed. And once again, I go back, it doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrat.
That's right.
Both parties will do this. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely right, and that is the way that it should be. The other thing is that if you have more competitiveness in the elections, the potential is to have more accountability by those candidates or by those elected officials. Mm-hmm. And then you have more compromise, and then it's not one party or the other party controlling everything and controlling the agenda. It's for the citizenry of Pennsylvania and the best for the citizenry. So you have different views. So unless you get rid of gerrymandering, we will continue to see, I believe, a further and further polarization of our politics at this point, and that is really counter to our democratic principles.
Yeah, and in theory, you would get better candidates too, because if you're in a competitive district, you've got to put up the best candidate. If you're not in a competitive district, you can pretty much put anybody with that letter behind them and they're going to win. So you also get better candidates, I think, with a fair map and a fair district.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And in this times of, you talked briefly about, well, what can we do during this coronavirus problem, and we're stuck at home. But there are a lot of things that people can do at this time. First thing is that I would really highly, and I'm touting our website, but it is a very, very good website. It's a nonpartisan website. It's fairdistrictspa.com. And on that website is a tremendous amount of information, nonpartisan, about gerrymandering and bills, the various bills, and what you can do and ways to get involved. So that's primary, I would say. But there are other things that are going on. And on that website is a petition that can be signed for an independent citizens commission. There is contact your legislators. It gives you the contact information for your legislators. And what we are asking people to do is, I realize the phone lines are pretty tied up right now because legislators really are, and many of them are involved in this problem right now. But emails, postcards, letters to ask that they support the legislation, and ask for a vote on the legislation would be helpful. And there is even on the website places where you can order postcards if you want to. You can go into that. There is a PCN series starting on Sunday at 2:30. It's a 6-part series about gerrymandering and Fair District's efforts to try to get redistricting reform. There is a movie at Midtown Cinema, and Midtown Cinema obviously is not open, but virtually it's open. And so you can go to Midtown Cinema, and so if you just type in Midtown Cinema Slay the Dragon, it will take you to the page, and you can view that video. You can rent it, and half the proceeds for renting it go to Midtown Cinema, so you're helping Midtown Cinema at the time. Nice. And then there is a discussion group, I think starting on Fair Maps on the 23rd, and you can access on the events page of our website also. So there are a number of things that people can do to remain involved, even though we're kind of stuck in this situation.
Yeah. So, and do you have a newsletter or anything that people can sign up for to stay informed, at least, of where this is going and maybe get involved?
Sure. Once again, if you go to the website, and by signing the petition on the website, that will automatically sign you up for the state newsletter, and it would, if whatever county you're in, it will sign you up for that county's local group newsletter. For example, I put one out for Dauphin County, and that would automatically sign you up. You can always decide not to. If you click on the bottom of the first newsletter that you get, you can opt out too. So it's not like you have to do that, but that's the best way to access it.
Okay. And of course, registering to vote is an awesome way to have your voice heard. So I highly recommend people do that. And just one last point, the census is going around right now. Does the census have any effect on gerrymandering in any way, or does it affect how the maps ultimately are drawn, or why is it important?
The census data is crucial because that is basic. That's the basis for for um, for redistricting, for reapportionment, because every 10 years after the census, they have to reapportion the states, the congressional seats for the states based on population shifts. And so if you do not have accurate population figures, you're not going to get accurate information so that the states can be reapportioned, because every congressional district has to be roughly the same. Roughly, when I say roughly, I mean within about 1 or 2 people, unless you have a waiver, the same size. And so they redistrict those 435 seats based on the census data. We're going to lose a seat. We have 18 right now. We're going to probably lose a seat because of, in relation to the rest of the country, we're losing population. So in the next redistricting, this is another effect of it. We will lose a seat, so we will lose a voice of representation in the US Congress because of this. And once again, if we don't have, we could lose 2 seats if we didn't have accurate census data. The census also affects what kinds of federal monies is distributed to the states, the counties, the local municipalities, the school districts, Medicaid. All of those things is based on census data. And then the third thing that's really important is the Electoral College. The Electoral College, our votes in the Electoral College for presidential elections are based on the amount of congressional representatives we have and the amount of senators. And so right now we have 20 seats in the Electoral College, or 20 votes or whatever. We're going to go, because of 2 senators and 18 House congressional seats. When we lose a seat, we're only going to have 19 votes in the Electoral College. So the census is absolutely critical in this whole redistricting process and in several other aspects of how things operate also.
And it's,
so that's a good question.
Yeah, and it's so easy to apply for the census. You know, you can do it online, you can do it through the mail. So, you know, that too is you doing your part. And so it's super important, like you said, to do that.
It is, and I know you're going to wrap up here, but you talked about voting. This should be a voting issue, and that's one of the things that you can find out how your candidates. We have a survey out now for all the candidates, and asking them how they feel about redistricting reform and that kind of thing. And you can find that on the website. It should be a voting issue, and I just want to remind people that we now have the ability to vote by mail. And so I know that things have been going, some information has been going out, but because of this corona virus, you may want to vote by mail, and it's not, you don't have to have a reason. You just can apply for it and vote by mail. So really important.
Absolutely. Brad, do we have any questions on Facebook that we haven't covered through our discussion?
You know, one on timeline for citizen action to be able to impact the upcoming redistricting following the census, which you covered. And then top 2 or 3 things that folks can do in the short term to impact the issue in the PA General Assembly, which she just went through a great many options for us to be able to do that. So everything's been covered. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
And I just do want to point out, you had mentioned postcards, and how impactful that is when a legislator gets 500 or 1,000 postcards delivered to their office on a specific subject. That is such a powerful statement, and it's a visual statement, right? It's easy to say, oh, we had 10 calls today, or we had 100 calls today. That's in one ear and out the other. But when that stack of postcards sits on their desk or in their office and they walk by it every day, it's a reminder of how important this topic is and what we want as voters. So if now everybody has lots of time to write a postcard. So I really do want to encourage that. If you want to go to your website and get some postcards and do that from home, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, you can get them from the website. You can order. I mean, they're really they're very pretty, and they have a lovely message already pre-printed on it. Or just a regular postcard and write it in and say, please support HB 22, HB 23, or SB 1022, 1023, and redistricting reform, whatever it is. But you're absolutely right, because we've had legislators pull them out of their desk and say, we've got these, this stack of postcards. Obviously, you're really interested in your people are informed. And
Yeah.
so you make a very, very good point. Postcards are really impactful.
And so we have two questions here. So Larry, you had a question. I think you're unmuted. If you don't mind, I'll just let you ask it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank you both for doing this and for years of dedication to this important project. Here's our concern. With the General Assembly being focused on CD19 issues and rebuilding the economy, which is now in shambles, we're all facing massive tax increases when this gets done. Our fear is redistricting is going to be pushed aside by the legislature. Your thoughts, comments, strategy, if indeed you believe that to also be the case.
Larry, you bring up a really good point on that. They are very involved with what is going on right now. We are continuing to push for and ask for an independent citizens commission, and what we've been doing for the last 3 years. One of the things that we are really focusing on, though, is the criteria-based parts of those, meaning strict guidelines, strict procedures for drawing the maps, strict use of data, and those kinds of things, and really hopefully being able to codify that, so that if you can't get the bills that we really want, in the form that we wanted, and we have to compromise, that those parts will be very, very strong. And that is maybe more doable. If you can't change the process, you still might be able to change how the process is done, meaning within the process, and have more time to do it. Because you are not then bound by the constitutional change requirements. And some people have asked about the census and pushing the census back. Is that going to change the way that we advocate at this, or is that going to give us more time? And quite frankly, it probably won't, because it's because of the way that our Constitution is written. So, but that has been a question that's come up. So, does that answer what you're asking, Larry?
Yep, appreciate it.
And Kathy had a question.
Hi, Jean.
Hi.
I was just wondering, how often do they draw these maps?
The maps are drawn. I'll tell you what, Kathy, that's an awesome question. Thank you very much. The maps are drawn every 10 years. So the maps that will be drawn in 2021, we will live with for 10 years, unless there is a court challenge to them somewhere along the line, like what happened the last time. And so it is critical that the maps be drawn fair when they're drawn, because you're stuck with them for 10 years.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's both congressional and state legislative districts. They draw them all at the same time. So.
And that goes back to what you said. It should be a voting issue. If you are truly concerned about this issue, definitely make sure to understand where the candidates on your ballot fall on this issue, because the people elected in November are going to be drawing those maps in 2021. So vote carefully, because every vote matters for sure.
Good point.
Okay, so thank you, Jean. I appreciate it. I don't see any other questions, but could you just give us your website again, and anything else that we missed that you wanna say?
No, we pretty much covered it. Our website is fairdistrictspa.com. And that's, you can get a tremendous amount of information. We also have a Facebook page for Dauphin County, and if you just type in Fair Districts PA Dauphin County, that should bring up your Facebook page. One other thing I did forget to mention about ways to get involved. The Committee of 70 has been running this Draw the Lines PA contests, mapping contests. And if you really like to do mapping, or you're really into computers and you're really into manipulating data and things like that, I would strongly suggest, because there's cash prizes for this too. The Committee of 70 is a nonpartisan organization, but they use these maps also as a civic engagement, and also to push legislators to say, hey, guess what? Citizens can draw maps. So if you go to drawthelinespa.org, that will take you to that website, and it will explain all of that. And that's a really cool way to understand more about the process and to get involved too. So if you got time on your hands, which we all do, that's another way to do it. I would like to once again thank you so much for this opportunity. If anybody is, wants more information, certainly they can get a hold of me at fdpa.dauphin county or Dauphin CO at gmail.com also. So that's fdpa.dauphinco@gmail.com. That's our email.
And I will put the link to the website in the comments below this, below the video, so that people can go directly to your website and get more information if they'd like.
Yeah, and if you need anything from me, Patty, also, or feel free. I will be happy to supply any other information that you might want.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was awesome, and I really appreciate, and Fair Districts really appreciates the opportunity to talk about this, and hopefully people will stay motivated, keep the faith, and let's get this done.
Absolutely, and thank you for doing what you do, because it's really important. We've got to get this fixed so that everybody's vote counts. So,
best stay healthy, stay well,
yep.
And hopefully we'll see each other on the other side of all of this.
I think we might. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.